The Willow Run was more than a creek. It was Ilara's metronome. For 12 years, since inheriting the rustic cedar-shingled cabin from her grandfather, the constant, low-whispering rush of water had marked the passage of her life. It carved a gentle, moss-lined path between the old-growth firs, defining the border of her small, wild acreage. In the spring, it roared with meltwater, a silver ribbon alive with migrating trout. In the deep summer, it settled into a soothing, amber trickle. It was a piece of the world that still made sense, a fragile vein of nature she fiercely protected. Her cabin sat nestled on a gentle rise overlooking the run. Her neighbor's property, a massive, recently subdivided parcel, stretched out across the western bank. For years, the land had belonged to an old, quiet farming family who respected the natural easement of the water. That peace was shattered 8 months ago when Victor Thorne bought the property. Victor Thorne was not a man who appreciated nature. He appreciated assets. He was a real estate mogul, the kind of man whose wealth seemed to be measured not by what he built, but by what he ruthlessly flattened. He'd torn down the quaint farmhouse in 2 days, replacing it with a modernist glass and steel monolith, a sharp, angular affront to the dense forest around it. The house, which now loomed over Ilara's side of the valley, looked less like a home and more like a minimalist data center. The conflicts had started small, his construction noise bleeding into her quiet mornings, his crews illegally dumping small piles of debris near the tree line, his landscapers using industrial herbicides that killed a patch of her prized wild raspberries. Ilara, a freelance hydrologist by trade, had filed polite, detailed reports citing local ordinances and environmental statutes. Each time, Victor's attorney, a cold, efficient woman who never seemed to blink, would send back a boilerplate letter promising immediate, remedial action, which never came. But nothing prepared her for the morning of October 14th. She was on her porch, nursing a black coffee, listening to the soothing, rhythmic sound of the water. The sound abruptly cut off, replaced by the grating, metallic screech of heavy machinery. It was a sound of violation. Ilara threw on her boots and sprinted down the slope, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When she burst through the ferns at the bank, the scene hit her like a physical blow. 3 industrial flatbeds were parked precariously on Victor's side. A massive earth mover, its treads already churned deep into the pristine riverbank, was excavating the soil. But it wasn't widening the creek or cleaning the banks. They were laying a foundation. And directly in the path of the Willow Run, the natural, flowing, ancient path, was a mixer truck pouring concrete. "Stop! Stop the truck!" Ilara screamed, scrambling across the few slick stones that remained on her side of the border. The foreman, a heavy-set man with a sweat-stained high-vis vest, didn't even look up immediately. He waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, hold your horses, lady. We're on a tight schedule. You can't do this. That is a protected watercourse. You are paving over a natural stream bed." Ilara's voice was ragged with disbelief and rising panic. She pointed at the mixer chute, which was actively disgorging a viscous gray river into the water. The Willow Run was fighting back, the clear water instantly clouding into a thick, poisonous soup, then being overwhelmed, suffocated by the heavy, flowing stone. The foreman finally turned, resting his hand on his hip. He was entirely unbothered. "Stream bed? This here is just an intermittent drainage ditch, according to the permits. And we're not touching your side, lady. This is all Mr. Thorne's land. He's putting in a precast culvert system and a drainage apron. Permanent solution for his basement foundation issues. Approved, signed, and stamped." He pulled a laminated diagram from his pocket and flashed it at her, a complex schematic of pipes and reinforced concrete. The entire design was centered on creating an artificial, straight-jacketed channel for the creek, but even that channel was only half the width of the original run. Foundation issues? He's created them! He illegally excavated his foundation below the natural water table, and this intermittent drainage ditch has flowed every single day for 200 years. The county map shows a clear watercourse easement, Ilara yelled, the raw grief giving way to white-hot rage. "Talk to his lawyers, ma'am," the foreman said, shrugging. "My job is to lay the concrete before the mix sets." Now, if you don't mind, you're standing in the splash zone." Ilara watched, transfixed in horror as the concrete flowed, thick and unstoppable, filling the entire width of the run on Victor Thorne's property line. It didn't just line the creek. It replaced it. Within minutes, the sound of the Willow Run, her metronome, was gone, muffled by the relentless thud, thud, thud of the concrete truck's barrel. The water that had flowed unimpeded for centuries now pooled darkly against the newly formed, crude gray dam at the edge of Ilara's property, swelling and rising, desperate to find its way forward. The flow was entirely choked. Just as the crews started smoothing the final slab, a black, silent electric SUV, a vehicle that screamed expensive, eco-friendly cynicism, pulled up. Victor Thorne stepped out. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair slicked back, his expression one of bored superiority. He didn't come over to gloat. He simply looked at the completed work as if admiring a newly hung piece of art. Ilara walked around the pooling water. Crossing the border she suddenly felt was meaningless. She stopped 10 feet from him. "Victor, you soulless parasite. You had no right to do that. That is an act of ecological vandalism." Victor adjusted his cuffs, not meeting her eyes. "Ilara, good morning." "Soulless parasite? Really? Bit dramatic, isn't it?" He finally looked at her, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "Let's talk facts, shall we? I owned the land. My engineers determined the instability of the subsoil required stabilization to support the necessary lateral load of my structure. The Willow Run, as you call it, a glorified runoff really, was destabilizing my land. We simply channeled it, legally. The county issued the final permit last week. You manipulated the permits. You called a permanent stream an intermittent runoff. I warned you what would happen. The water has to go somewhere. Now it's backing up onto my property." "That, my dear, is a you problem," Victor said, his tone chillingly casual. "The water is free to use the culvert we provided. If it chooses to pool upstream because of your existing topographical conditions, that's not my liability. Your grandfather's cabin is, after all, below the highest historical watermark. Perhaps you should invest in some serious drainage." He paused, stepping closer to the massive gray slab that was once her creek bed. "Look at this, Ilara. Beautiful, clean, functional. This isn't vandalism. This is progress. You're talking about a few fish and some sentimental nonsense. I'm talking about a multi-million-dollar asset. Which one do you think the courts are going to prioritize?" The implicit threat hung heavy in the damp air. Ilara knew the truth. Fighting him in court would cost hundreds of thousands, years of her life, and even if she won, the concrete would still be there for years during the appeal. Victor Thorne could afford to bleed her dry. He was banking on her lack of capital to surrender her morals. "I will fight you," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists, her knuckles white. Victor only laughed, a dry, dismissive sound that was worse than a shout. "By all means, try. My attorney loves billable hours. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the final seal on the retaining wall." He turned and walked away towards his house. Already done with her, done with the conversation, done with the natural world. Ilara stood there, alone, staring at the concrete. The only sound was the unnatural, slow slosh of water pooling deeper and deeper on her property. A murky, defeated pond where a vibrant, singing stream used to be. The concrete slab was stark, alien, and utterly final. It was a line drawn in the sand, but a line made of stone. The fight, she realized, wasn't about the creek anymore. It was about raw power, and Victor had just proven he held all of it. Later that afternoon, locked in her cabin, Ilara didn't call her lawyer. She pulled out the old county planning documents, the historical hydrology reports her grandfather had tucked away, and cross-referenced them with the hastily filed construction documents the foreman had flashed at her. As a professional hydrologist, she knew how to read the landscape's secrets, and she knew how to read building code violations. Victor's schematic, which looked so official, was based on a lie, the lie that the creek was intermittent. But the bigger, more critical lie lay in the specifications for his basement. The Thorne monolith, she discovered, had an unusually deep, pressurized basement, a subterranean 3-car garage, and a custom temperature-controlled wine cellar. To protect it from the historically high water table, Victor's engineers had installed an aggressive, multi-layer French drain system and sump pump network. The final detail was the chilling revelation, the termination point of this immense drainage system. It wasn't pointed toward a municipal storm sewer or a dedicated retention pond, which would be standard practice. It terminated deep underground, just past his concrete culvert, specifically designed to inject any subsurface water into the flow of the now-paved Willow Run. He was not just paving the creek, he was secretly using it as a high-volume, continuous disposal system for... The crunch was loud, sharp, and final, a violent protest of steel against stone. Elara felt the impact all the way up her arms, the vibration running through her body like a live wire. It was not the solid, unyielding resistance she had feared. It was the sound of a seam giving way. She dropped the pickaxe. A line of brackish water, thin at first, began to weep from the fractured junction, instantly widening the hairline crack that snaked across the surface of Victor's new concrete apron. It was exactly where her hydrological instincts and Victor's own flawed blueprints had told her to strike. The weakest point where the new slab met the older, foundational retaining wall that shored up his meticulously manicured lawn. The junction was where his subterranean drainage system was designed to inject his groundwater into the now paved culvert. The water pooling on Elara's side, previously muddy and sluggish, now had an escape route. The sound changed from a quiet slosh to a pressurized siphon. Elara snatched up the military shovel. This was no longer blind rage. It was cold, calculated engineering. She wasn't trying to tear down the whole slab. She was creating a point of failure, a focused channel. She dug furiously at the soft, waterlogged earth immediately adjacent to the cracked corner of the concrete on her side of the property line, creating a deep, narrow trench that ran parallel to Victor's retaining wall before angling sharply toward the point of fracture. She worked for 30 minutes, muscles burning, breath fogging the cooling air. She deepened the trench until it was nearly waist-high. When she was satisfied with the depth, she used the sharp edge of the shovel to pry and lever away the loose, fragmented concrete from the pickaxe strike. The water, the volume of the entire backed-up Willow Run, pushed back, surging into the narrow, newly excavated channel she had created. It wasn't just the creek water either. As the pressure from Elara's pooling water found the compromised seam, it also met the outflow from Victor's internal foundation pumps. Victor's system was designed to repel water, but his concrete had created a blockage, turning his defense into a self-sabotaging offense. His own high-volume, continuously operating sump pumps were now actively feeding the rupture Elara had created. The small hiss became a powerful, accelerating rush. The water, trapped, condensed, and now released, was flowing with the violence of a broken artery. It didn't just flow through the crack. It began to erode the packed soil beneath Victor's structure, following the path of least resistance, a path Elara had deliberately carved, angling the flow directly toward the massive, underground concrete box that housed his basement. Elara leaned on her shovel, chest heaving, watching the dark, churning water race down the gradient. The river, her metronome, was back, though its song was now a furious, vengeful roar, up on the hill inside the pristine, noise-canceling confines of the Thorn monolith. Victor was enjoying his first post-construction victory coffee. He was on a conference call with his attorney, detailing how the nuisance of Elara would soon be extinguished via a temporary restraining order. "She's clearly emotionally unstable, Patricia," Victor said, pacing his glass office with a view of the distant, placid lake, carefully avoiding looking toward Elara's messy, cedar-shingled intrusion. "This concrete work is final. We need to secure the perimeter and make it clear that any further trespass results in immediate criminal charges." The attorney's voice, tinny and confident, crackled over the speakerphone. "We're drafting the cease and desist now, Victor. It cites geological necessity and valid permits. She has no case. Legally, the water flow is irrelevant to your property rights once the diversion culvert is in place. You've sealed the deal, literally." Just as he was about to confirm the strategy, a high-pitched, insistent electronic whine, a sound he instantly recognized and hated, split the air. It was the Level 3 hydrostatic pressure alert from his basement monitoring system. Victor stopped pacing. His face, usually a mask of control, tightened with irritation. "Hold on, Patricia. I'm getting an alarm." He walked briskly to a discreet wall panel, punching in a code that brought up a live schematic of his subterranean levels. The screen was flashing a frantic amber warning. "Basement drainage failure. High inflow detected." "I'm seeing unexpected infiltration," he muttered, dropping the phone onto his desk and grabbing the small, leather-bound remote that operated his internal elevator. "The sensor in the third sub-level near the wine cellar is showing a pressure anomaly. I'll call you back." He didn't wait for the elevator. He took the emergency service stairs, his Italian leather shoes thudding heavily against the polished concrete risers. He reached the deepest basement level, the heart of his asset storage, in seconds. The subterranean garage was vast, containing 3 classic climate-controlled vehicles he rarely drove. The air in the usually sterile space was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and mineral deposits. Victor stopped dead. His sharp inhalation, the only sound besides the distant, frantic WHR of the main sump pump working overtime. It wasn't a pipe burst. It was worse. A dark widening stain was visible on the far side of the reinforced concrete wall, near the entrance to the wine cellar, the section directly backing onto the creek bed. A steady, thin trickle of water was running down the wall, collecting into a rapidly spreading puddle on the immaculate concrete floor. "Impossible," Victor whispered, taking a step back. The trickle was already becoming a continuous stream. The high-pitched whine he had heard was the sound of the internal French drain system failing to keep up with a sudden, massive surge of water outside the wall. The water pressure was immense, pushing inward through a structural flaw, likely the exact spot where the outer pipework for his high-volume drainage tied into the retaining wall. He sprinted to the control panel of the basement's environmental system. He saw the data in real time. The external water pressure meter, which should have been near zero thanks to his culvert, was spiking into the red zone. The inflow rate was currently exceeding the capacity of his outflow pumps, and then he remembered Alara, her voice ragged with hatred. "I warned you what would happen. The water has to go somewhere." Victor's face contorted in a mask of pure, murderous recognition. He hadn't just angered her. He had given her the surgical knowledge required to execute a perfect strike. He ran back up the stairs, his panic escalating into savage fury. Alara was back in her cabin, standing by the large paned window overlooking the creek slope. She hadn't bothered to wipe the mud from her face or hands. She watched the water flow. It was a majestic sight. The raw energy of the Willow Run reclaiming its power forced down a narrow, human-made path toward a human-made weakness. The headlights of Victor's black SUV materialized through the twilight gloom, tearing across his lawn at a reckless speed. The vehicle skidded to a stop right at the edge of his property line, near the point where the stream was now roaring into the ground. Victor Thorne burst out of the SUV. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket anymore, and his tie was askew. His silver hair, usually perfect, was ruffled. He looked like a man violently pulled from a comfortable trance. He spotted Alara's pickaxe lying casually beside the newly formed trench, glinting in the dark. He saw the furious, surging water disappearing into the earth. The realization hit him, visible even from the distance. She knew. She engineered this. He stormed across the uneven ground, stopping on his side of the boundary, separated from Alara by the newly formed, roaring channel of water. You psychotic trespasser," Victor roared, his voice thick with disbelief and indignation. It was the first time Alara had ever seen him lose his composure. "What the hell did you do? Do you have any idea the damage you've caused?" Alara stepped onto her porch, arms crossed, the cold wind whipping her hair around her face. She didn't raise her voice. "I corrected an illegal obstruction, Victor. I simply facilitated the natural flow of the water you so carelessly choked off." "Natural flow. You put a pickaxe through my property. That is criminal vandalism, structural sabotage. You are destroying a $20 million structure. Oh, it was an unstable structure built illegally below the high water mark, wasn't it? Alara countered, her voice low and sharp. Your own blueprints showed that you were attempting to pump your groundwater into a permanent creek you swore was intermittent to the county. You built a faulty dam, Victor. I just gave the dam a relief valve. The liability is yours. You broke the law of the land, and now the law of nature is collecting. Victor's eyes narrowed, burning with pure spite. The police will be here in minutes. I'm having you arrested for felony destruction of property. You will lose this derelict cabin, your land, everything you own. I will sue you into bankruptcy, and then I will bury you under paper. Go ahead, Alara said, a dangerous, calm smile touching her lips. When the police get here, I'll show them the original geological survey and your illegal drainage pipe. I'll show them the permits you manipulated. You paved over a protected stream and tried to turn it into your septic waste overflow. Let's see who the judge decides is the bigger criminal. He was caught. She had him cornered, not physically, but legally and morally. His sophisticated crime was based on a hidden structural weakness, and she had exploited it perfectly. The fury on his face was a terrifying thing, a man used to total power suddenly feeling the cold sting of helplessness. You thin? The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the valley steeped in a cold, silent mist. Alara stood at her window, the only light in her cabin coming from a small, battery-powered lantern. The Willow Run still flowed through the muddy channel she had carved, but the roar had settled back into a vicious, continuous gurgle, pulling the last of the pooled floodwater into Victor Thorne's basement breach. Victor's house was a black silhouette against the pearly-gray sky, a massive, drowned tomb. The power outage had persisted, plunging the entire eastern slope into an unnatural silence. Alara knew the police would arrive. The call Victor made in his initial panic was a guarantee, but she wasn't hiding. She spent the early hours cleaning the mud from her pickaxe and shovel, methodically placing them back in the shed. Then she laid out her evidence on the dining table, the original county survey maps, the historical data confirming the permanent nature of the Willow Run, and the critical page from Victor's own, carelessly filed blueprints detailing his high-volume subsurface drain and its illegal terminus into the creek. Just as the sun crested the ridge, painting the glass face of the Thorne monolith with a sickly orange light, two vehicles arrived, a local sheriff's department cruiser, mud-splashed and familiar, and a pristine, unmarked black sedan. Alara met them on her porch, calm and composed. Deputy Dale Perkins, a man whose family had farmed these hills for 3 generations, looked tired and deeply uncomfortable. He carried a clipboard and avoided Alara's eye. "Morning, Alara," Perkins said, his voice flat. "Mr. Thorne reported felony structural vandalism and trespass. Says you deliberately flooded his property last night." "Morning?" "Dale. And Mr. Thorne paved over a permanent stream bed in violation of county environmental statutes to conceal an illegal subterranean drainage system," Alara replied, gesturing toward the newly formed trench where the creek now ran. "I merely reinstated the natural hydrostatic pressure he deliberately ignored. I can show you the documents." Before Perkins could respond, the driver of the black sedan, Patricia Vance, Victor's attorney, emerged. She was wearing a tailored suit, impervious to the damp air, and her face was a study in cold legal hostility. She walked past the deputy as if he were furniture and addressed Alara. "Miss Renwick," Patricia said, her voice a precise, sharp instrument, "I advise you to remain silent. You have committed a premeditated act of criminal destruction against property valued at over $20 million. The resulting water damage has rendered the subterranean foundation unstable, destroying invaluable assets, including a collection of rare vintage wines and sensitive server equipment. My client estimates the initial damages at $5 million. Alara stepped off the porch and stood firm. "And I estimate the ecological and legal damages from your client's premeditated criminal obstruction of a protected waterway at considerably more. I have the evidence of his fraud right here. He built a dam and then complained when the river fought back." Patricia allowed herself a thin, pitying smile. "A river? Or a glorified ditch as certified by his engineers? That is a matter for civil court. What is a matter for criminal court, however, is the weapon." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the corner of Ilara's shed. "The pickaxe you used to breach his retaining wall. Your intent was malicious, your action was criminal, and the consequence is catastrophic." She didn't wait for Ilara to respond. She turned back to Deputy Perkins, handing him a sheaf of laminated papers. "Deputy, we are filing a temporary restraining order and an immediate notice of eviction. Effective immediately, under State Code 45.92. Ms. Renwick's property poses an immediate, ongoing structural hazard to an adjacent landowner due to deliberate sabotage of a retaining structure. She is to be removed from the premises within 24 hours to prevent further escalation. She is also formally served with a civil lawsuit for punitive and compensatory damages. $5 million to start." The speed and weight of the attack hit Ilara like a physical blow. Victor wasn't playing the long game. He was using his financial power as a weapon of mass destruction. He wasn't trying to win the court case. He was trying to choke her out of existence before she could even hire a decent defense. Perkins looked from Patricia's imperious face to the $5 million figure on the document, then back to Ilara, who suddenly looked very small and very alone in the morning light. "Ilara," Perkins began, rubbing the back of his neck, "I can't arrest you right now, but this restraining order is airtight. You have to understand you are legally obligated to vacate this property by sunrise tomorrow. I'm going to have to escort you off the property if you're still here." "Vacate? This is my home, Dale! This is Victor trying to cover up his crime with money," Ilara exclaimed, the adrenaline from the night finally dissolving into cold dread. "It doesn't matter, Ilara," Patricia interjected, her voice devoid of emotion. "The court recognizes a clear and present threat to my client's multi-million-dollar asset. You have until tomorrow morning. If you attempt to re-enter your property, we will prosecute for trespass." Patricia turned and walked back to her sedan. As the car pulled away, Victor Thorne himself appeared on the terrace of his dark house. He was dressed in a thick velvet robe, a bizarre contrast to the chaos. He didn't wave or shout. He simply raised his coffee cup in a silent, mocking toast toward Ilara's porch, his face a triumphant, venomous smirk. Ilara spent the next few hours in a frenzy, packing the things that mattered: her grandfather's journals, her geological reference books, her hard drive containing years of local environmental research, and the laminated blueprints of Victor's illegal drain. The sense of siege was suffocating. Every moment felt weighted by the deadline. She knew she couldn't outrun the legal system or the financial might of Victor Thorne. She needed a witness, an official body with the power to freeze Victor's assets and force a true environmental inspection. She realized the sheriff and the local court were already corrupted or overwhelmed by Victor's influence. She needed to go higher, faster. She called her lawyer, a small-town environmental advocate named Marcus, and told him everything: the illegal drain, the manipulated permits, the imminent flooding, and the $5 million lawsuit. "Ilara, listen to me," Marcus said, his voice tense over the phone. "That eviction notice is temporary and we can fight it, but you must comply today. Get out. Once you're off the property, you can call the State Environmental Quality Board. They are the only ones who can mandate a stop work order based on the creek's historical designation. But Ilara, you cannot under any circumstances approach Victor's property or the water channel again." Ilara agreed, knowing she was lying. She couldn't leave. Not when Victor's next move was already taking shape. Around mid-afternoon, before she could even load her final boxes into her rusted pickup truck, a fleet of new, heavy machinery appeared on Victor's land. It wasn't the construction crew from the previous day. This was a different breed of equipment: massive reinforced steel plates, hydraulic excavators with specialized deep-boring attachments, and the unnerving sight of several massive, industrial-grade storage tanks. Victor wasn't trying to repair his retaining wall. He was executing a scorched earth strategy, an immediate, total escalation designed to protect his foundation at the expense of everything and everyone else. Ilara crept to the boundary line, watching the crew, not Victor's usual men, but professionals in unmarked utility vehicles, work with brutal efficiency. The hydraulic excavators began digging a new, massive secondary trench, starting dozens of yards upstream from the original paved culvert. This trench ran perpendicular to the creek, digging deep into the hill, angling toward the forest border of Victor's property. Then the purpose of the tanks became horrifyingly clear. The crew began assembling a colossal temporary steel baffle wall that they were sinking into the secondary trench. This wall was designed to intercept the entire flow of the Willow Run before it reached the concrete culvert, diverting 100% of the stream flow away from Victor's house and his failed dam. Where was the water going? Ilara followed the line of the secondary trench as it carved a new, destructive path through the dense woods on Victor's acreage. It ended not at a retention pond, but abruptly, right at the furthest corner of Victor's property. The new illegal diversion channel was aimed directly at the next property down the hill, the small, ancient, dilapidated farmhouse owned by Mrs. Henderson, a 90-year-old widow who was the last surviving link to the area's farming past. The diversion was going to turn Mrs. Henderson's entire backyard into a flash flood zone, but Victor didn't stop there. He wasn't just passing his problem to someone weaker. He turned his attention back to Ilara's property line. Working quickly, the crew unloaded a complex assembly of high-powered industrial heaters and massive ventilation fans. They began positioning the fans directly along the damaged retaining wall and the cracked concrete apron, aiming them at the breach point. They were going to super dry the area to stop the leak, using extreme heat to stabilize the saturated soil. The sheer heat emanating from the burners was visible as shimmering waves in the cool afternoon air. The heat would not only dry his foundation, but would kill the delicate ecosystem of Ilara's trench, the moss, the ferns, the emerging undergrowth, and, more importantly, would super dry the soil around Ilara's O. The darkness was total, save for the oppressive orange glow radiating from Victor's industrial heaters. Ilara was operating on pure adrenaline, the shock of the $5 million lawsuit and the eviction notice secondary to the cold, hard reality of Victor's illegal diversion. He had used her own act of self-defense, the breach, as the pretext to commit a crime of vastly greater scale, rerouting the Willow Run into his neighbor's yard. Ilara couldn't wait until morning. She sat in her darkened cabin, the flickering screen of her laptop illuminating her focused, tired face. She had all the documentation ready, the video footage of the steel baffle wall being installed, the coordinates of Mrs. Henderson's house, Victor's old blueprints, and the historical classification of the stream. She didn't call the local office of the State Environmental Quality Board, SEQB. She called the emergency hazard line in the state capitol, using her professional credentials to bypass automated systems. My name is Ilara Renwick. I am a licensed hydrologist, and I am reporting an imminent, catastrophic failure of a massive, illegal temporary dam structure installed by Victor Thorne at 1420 Ridgecrest Trail, she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The dam is currently diverting 100% of the Willow Run, a Class 2 permanent waterway, into an unarmored trench that terminates directly above the property of an elderly, vulnerable resident and is threatening a primary county road culvert downstream. This is a regional flood risk, not a local dispute. I have documented video evidence, and I possess the original blueprints proving structural fraud. She spent 40 agonizing minutes uploading the files and arguing the severity of the situation. Her knowledge was her shield. Her professional insistence on facts over emotion finally cut through the bureaucracy. By 10 p.m., she received confirmation. An emergency site investigation team from the SEQB's compliance division, accompanied by a structural engineer, would arrive at dawn. Knowing she had bought herself precious hours, Ilara made a crucial, dangerous decision. She left the cabin, stepping lightly through the damp woods toward Mrs. Henderson's property. The old farmhouse sat 100 feet lower than Victor's property line, nestled in a small bowl of land. The roar of the diverted water was already audible here, a powerful, unnatural sound in the still night. Ilara found the 90-year-old widow, Mrs. Henderson sitting on her porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, watching the ominous sound approach. "Mrs. Henderson," Ilara whispered, stepping into the dim light of the porch. "You need to leave, now!" Mrs. Henderson looked up, her eyes clear but tired. "Oh, Ilara, dear." "I knew that man was trouble. I hear the river, child. It sounds like it's running through my vegetable patch." It soon will be, Ilara said urgently. Victor has illegally diverted the entire creek flow and it's aimed right here. That temporary wall is going to fail tonight or tomorrow. When it does, your property will be hit by a flash flood. Mrs. Henderson slowly rose, looking towards the ridge where Victor's machinery hummed. The Thorn boy always thought he was smarter than God. Used to play with my boys in that creek. His daddy had more sense. He kept chickens. She paused, then gave Ilara a frail, determined smile. I ain't going. Not until the sun comes up and I can see what I'm packing. Ilara's heart sank. She couldn't physically force the old woman to leave. At least get up to the second floor. Take your vital documents. I'm calling the state, but they won't be here until morning. Please promise me you'll stay upstairs. After securing a reluctant promise, Ilara raced back up the hill, the shadow of Victor's monolith now a looming enemy. The SEQB team arrived precisely at 6 a.m. 3 vehicles, 2 unmarked SUVs, and a highly visible white utility truck pulled up to the dirt track leading into Victor's property. Leading the team was Lena Torres, a lean, 30-something field inspector known for her sharp eyes and zero tolerance for environmental fraud. They were met instantly by Patricia Vance, Victor's attorney, who materialized from the shadow of the house. Clutching a briefcase and a portable motion-activated spotlight, "This property is private," Patricia announced, blocking the path. "This is an active criminal investigation site related to ongoing structural sabotage. Any unauthorized access requires a warrant." Lena Torres showed her badge. "We are the State Environmental Quality Board Compliance Division. We do not require a warrant to investigate an imminent threat to a protected state watercourse and adjacent properties. We have received an emergency hazard report, corroborated by initial satellite and public record review. We are exercising our right to inspect the point of diversion, the temporary steel baffle wall, and the downstream path immediately." Victor, dressed in the same expensive robe, watched from his terrace. "You are disrupting active stabilization efforts," Patricia snapped, stepping closer to Lena. "My client is working under emergency authorization to mitigate a flood caused by a hostile act of vandalism. You are trespassing. Your stabilization includes diverting a Class 2 stream flow," Lena countered calmly, gesturing to the powerful flow visible down the slope. "That requires a massive Class 1 permit and an environmental impact statement, neither of which you have filed. The work stops now," she turned to her 2 deputies. "Issue an immediate stop work order. Secure the construction equipment." The SEQB team began moving, but Patricia played her first card. "We have filed an immediate injunction against this inspection with the County Superior Court, citing abuse of process and commercial disruption. The local sheriff's department has been notified. Any action you take will be viewed as contempt." A standoff began, while Lena, holding the emergency state authority, stood firm against Patricia's high-priced legal stall tactics. Ilara, using the chaos as cover, slipped back to her cabin and grabbed the box of evidence. She had to bypass the sheriff's deputy, Dale Perkins, who was now guarding the edge of Victor's property. "Dale, I need to talk to Inspector Torres," Ilara said, holding up the box. "I have the blueprints." Perkins looked agonizingly torn. "Ilara, I can't. I have an active order to keep you away from Thorne's property and a secondary order to enforce your eviction." "I see that box. I have to assume you're re-entering." "I am assisting the state with a major violation," Ilara hissed. "That wall is going to give, Dale. Victor is going to flood the valley." Before Perkins could make a decision, Lena Torres spotted Ilara and strode over. "Ms. Renwick, you are the reporting hydrologist? I need everything you have, immediately." Ilara thrust the box into Lena's hands, pointing to the key blueprints. The foundation detail shows his pump system tied into the retaining wall. That steel baffle wall is unstable. It's driven into saturated soil without proper shoring. The volume of water behind it right now is immense. It's not a dam. It's a time bomb. Lena and her engineer immediately focused on the blueprints. The engineer's eyes widened. She's right. This temporary wall won't hold under a minor storm. It's a miracle it survived the night. The SEQB team raced toward the diversion site, but Victor, seeing his strategy crumbling, escalated the conflict. He shouted orders to his remaining crew, who suddenly fired up the industrial heaters to maximum capacity, causing the air along the property line to shimmer violently. "Stop that equipment! That's a hazard!" Lena yelled, but the crew, paid handsomely and insulated by Victor's attorney, ignored her. The sheer, desiccating heat began to envelop Alara's trench and the soil surrounding her cabin, rapidly cracking the damp earth and creating a visible column of superheated air. Patricia Vance seized the moment of distraction. She turned to Deputy Perkins. "Deputy, you have a court order. The trespasser is on the premises, actively collaborating with an illegal search. Enforce the restraining order and the eviction." Perkins hesitated, looking at the heat, the water, and Alara's resolute, defiant face. But the law was the law. He walked to Alara, his hand resting reluctantly on the holster of his sidearm. "Alara, I'm sorry. You have to come with me. You're violating the temporary restraining order," Perkins said, his voice laced with regret. "Dale, look at that wall. It's vibrating! The whole hill is destabilized," Alara pleaded, pointing past him to the steel baffle wall, which was now visibly straining under the creek's immense hydrostatic force. The structural engineer from the SEQB suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. "It's failing! Get back! The shoring is collapsing!" The industrial heaters, the diversion wall, the sleek glass of Victor's house, everything was momentarily forgotten as all eyes snapped to the steel barrier. A thick stream of mud and water was violently jetting out from the base of the baffle wall, followed by a terrifying, prolonged groan of bending, stressed steel. The structure was yielding. Lena Torres screamed into her radio, "Emergency evacuation! All personnel clear the area. Structural failure imminent." The SEQB team scrambled backwards. Victor, on his terrace, finally understood the true, terrifying scale of his mistake. The failure wouldn't be a gentle leak. It would be a catastrophic release of compressed water. Perkins grabbed Alara's arm, pulling her away from the property line. "We have to move, Alara, now!" But Alara shook him off, her gaze locked on the failing dam. Her fear was overridden by the realization that Mrs. Henderson was still in the house below. "Mrs. Henderson!" Alara screamed, plunging down the slope towards the lower property, ignoring Perkins's frantic shouts. "Victor, whiten it!" The roar of the deluge was no longer a natural sound. It was the sound of a mountain weeping steel and earth. The entire volume of the Willow Run, supercharged by debris and compressed by Victor's failed dam, hit the valley floor with the force of an avalanche. Alara sprinted through the dense, low-hanging mist, fueled by a terrifying clarity of purpose. Deputy Perkins was yards behind her, shouting into his radio for emergency services that were still minutes away. The floodwaters, guided by Victor's reckless, unarmored trench, slammed into Mrs. Henderson's backyard first. The porch railing dissolved, and the small shed where she kept her canning supplies lifted and spun away. The wave, a brown, furious battering ram, struck the back foundation of the 90-year-old farmhouse. The building shuddered, but the sturdy, hand-built structure of the original homestead held fast, though the entire ground floor was instantly swamped. Alara reached the house, slipping on the slick, mud-covered path. Water was now waist-deep in the yard, rushing violently past the front door. "Mrs. Henderson!" Alara screamed, fighting the pull of the current. Deputy Perkins, finally catching up, grabbed Alara's arm. "We can't go through that, Alara. It's a death trap!" "She's upstairs. We have to go through the back window. It's lower to the ground." Alara yelled back, pointing to a small kitchen window, now partially submerged but still intact. Perkins, seeing the desperation and the sheer velocity of the water, discarded protocol. He pulled his crowbar and followed Alara around the corner of the house. The force of the water against the wall made the structure moan. Alara and Perkins shattered the window glass and climbed through the jagged opening into the dark, churning living room. The water inside was a foot deep and filled with floating furniture and debris. They waded blindly toward the center staircase, Alara leading the way, calling out the old woman's name. They found Mrs. Henderson on the second-floor landing, clutching a small box of photographs. She wasn't crying, but her face was pale with shock. "The thorn boy finally got my petunias," she murmured, her voice thin. Perkins quickly scooped the small, frail woman into a fireman's carry. "We're going out the back, Mrs. Henderson." "Hold tight!" As they climbed back through the window, the rescue helicopter finally arrived, its spotlight cutting a blinding white cone through the morning mist. They carried Mrs. Henderson to higher ground, leaving her in the care of the arriving paramedics. Alara turned and looked back up the hill toward Victor Thorne's property. The SEQB team and their structural engineer, Lena Torres, were gathered at the site of the catastrophic failure, their faces grim under the harsh spotlights. Victor, still wearing his velvet robe, stood alone 50 feet from the breach, mud covering his expensive slippers, watching his ruin unfold. The destruction was biblical in its irony. The deluge, once freed, had surged past Mrs. Henderson's house and carved a brand new, deep ravine through the valley floor, establishing a new, permanent course for the Willow Run, a course that entirely bypassed Victor's initial concrete culvert. But the most profound damage was not at the bottom of the hill. It was at the top. The structural engineer approached Victor, Lena Torres, and Patricia Vance flanking him. His voice was clinical and devoid of sympathy. The initial breach destabilized the soil beneath the retaining wall, as predicted, the engineer stated, pointing to the gaping, muddy hole. But your secondary intervention, the industrial heaters, super-desiccated the remaining soil, turning it into brittle clay. When the baffle wall failed, the force of the water caused massive lateral pressure on that desiccated soil. The earth gave way, and the water is now actively channeling behind the original retaining wall, following the path of least resistance. He gestured toward the monolith. The sleek glass and steel structure, Victor's monument to greed, was no longer perfectly level. A massive hairline crack ran vertically from the foundation to the third floor. On the side facing the breach, the structure had visibly, irrevocably sunk 6 inches into the saturated, compromised earth. "Your basement is compromised, Mr. Thorne," the engineer concluded. "And your foundation is failing. This structure is condemned. The cost of remediation, if possible, will exceed the building's value. The cause is documented: reckless disregard for geological and environmental law, and the implementation of hazardous stabilization methods. The state is issuing an immediate demolition order." Patricia Vance, for the first time, was silent, her face frozen in professional horror. The $5 million asset was worthless. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit Victor had filed against Alara was now instantly dwarfed by the criminal and civil liabilities he faced from the state. The county and Mrs. Henderson, Deputy Perkins, finally walked up to Victor, shaking his head. "Victor, you're coming with me." Victor didn't resist. He looked past Perkins, past the SEQB team, and his eyes found Alara standing on the edge of the new roaring ravine. He was broken, not just financially, but spiritually. "Arthur warned me," Victor rasped, his voice barely audible above the roar of the water. He was referring to Alara's grandfather. "He always said the land remembers. He knew this spot was a flood plain. He was my partner, Alara. We bought this land together years ago, planning to build an environmental preserve. He designed your cabin. He designed this house, but he insisted the foundation be set higher. When I decided to bury the wine cellar and the garage below the water table, he walked away. He filed the original Class 2 stream protection documents to stop me." Victor coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I paved the creek to silence him. To prove I was smarter. I didn't just pave water, Alara. I paved over Arthur's legacy. Your revenge, it was his warning.